Hello and welcome to Ocean Education International's Professional Development Series. In this discussion, we will be deconstructing the dive industry. This video lecture was designed with two purposes. Primarily, it's to support students in my Sustainable Dive Tourism courses. This includes my EcoPro course, which is a 6-day program on sustainable dive tourism that I teach at Sea Experience in Fort Lauderdale. The video also supports an expanded version of a new online course called Sustainable Dive Leader, which I created in partnership with the Ocean First Institute. However, some of you may not be enrolled students, but are here for general interest or to become a more savvy and employable dive professional. Regardless, all are welcome. If you are an enrolled student, you should already have received an orientation letter from me with a Dropbox link to your course materials. On that site, you'll find a PowerPoint version of this presentation in the folder marked PowerPoints. You can link directly from that presentation to all videos, articles, reports, and podcasts cited in this presentation. For those of you who are not enrolled students, here is a list of the videos and other resources we'll reference during the presentation. You can stop the video here and take a screenshot for future reference. However, I'll be happy to send you a document with hot links so you can avoid typing the extensive text in the URLs. I'll give you my contact information at the end of the presentation. Before we get into any details, I would like to first explain the overall goal of this presentation. First, what is deconstruction? According to Webster, it's defined as taking apart or examining something in order to reveal its basis or composition, often with the intention of exposing biases, flaws, or inconsistencies. Another source says it's the reduction of something to its constituent parts in order to reinterpret it or present it differently. This is precisely what I would like to accomplish. More than merely conveying some interesting facts, I hope this will inspire you to reflect and re-examine your perspective on a career as a dive professional by pointing out issues rarely discussed and confronting head-on some of the more serious obstacles facing our industry today. With that said, please stop the video and take a few moments to review the topics we'll discuss. I began my career in the diving industry in 1976. Back then, there was no question that we were in the retail business of selling scuba, with all other services considered secondary. The fundamental premise of this presentation is that I believe the rules have changed. The paradigm is dead, and to grow, we must push back the blinders and completely rethink what business we're in and how we conduct that business. Unfortunately, the dive industry has too long been like a terminal cancer patient who hasn't been told about his disease. I use the term 80s model because this period is described by some as the dive industry's golden age. In the retail realm, there was no question selling equipment was the primary endeavor, and training and travel were considered secondary. In fact, my first employer, a dive store owner, called travel a necessary nuisance. In the resort sector, the emphasis was placed primarily on safety, enjoyment, comfort, and convenience. There was little or no consideration for any social or environmental impact. In my view, this is better described not as the 80s model, but as the zombie model, because I see it as something dead but refusing to stay that way. What follows is a case I will make showing this model will not serve us well as we progress into the future, and it must be abandoned for something better. What happens to businesses that hang on to outdated business models is exemplified here. Many do not know that Blockbuster had an opportunity to purchase an upstart company called Netflix for a mere $50 million. However, Blockbuster executives thought the subscription business model didn't make sense. Today, Netflix is valued at almost $160 billion. There is a lesson in this for the dive industry in not recognizing emerging opportunities and changes in consumer demographics, attitude, and behavior that warrant rethinking the industry's way of doing business. While scuba diving may be growing globally, it has not happened in North America for several decades. This is reflected in the consolidation of dive centers as seen here. Once numbering more than 1,800, we are now down to, as of this date, exactly 851. An equally significant statistic is that in a recent study, nearly half of all dive store owners said they would not even be in the business if they could make a living just teaching. When half of the professionals in a business do not even want to be in that business, we clearly have a problem. The scuba industry has traditionally done a poor job of data collection, so the best sources often come from other sports or outdoor organizations as shown here. These data from the Outdoor Institute of America show a decline in participation in scuba diving over the past decade. This has occurred despite training a relatively consistent number of new divers over that period. As just mentioned, these data reflect the market of North America. The dive industry in Asia, by contrast, is doing well, which is why you may read news items and articles, even in academic journals, that scuba diving is a growing business. But how does scuba diving compare with other water sports? As you see here, based on data from the Sports and Fitness Institute of America, many water sports are growing, while scuba diving clearly is not, at least not in North America. As you see here, this lack of growth and participation is mirrored in the sale of equipment. According to the Sports and Fitness Industry Association, there are about 2.7 million scuba divers in America, with about 7.4 million snorkelers. But there is an important distinction when it comes to scuba divers. Of that 2.7 million, 2 million are considered occasional divers, defined as making 8 or fewer dives per year, while the number of core divers, defined as making more than 8 dives per year, is just under 700,000. The good news is that things appear to be looking up. Since 2021, scuba diving participation has grown by 7.3% according to SFIA data. But there's an important caveat. Occasional divers, here referred to as casual divers, has grown by over 12%. However, participation by core divers has dropped by more than 5%, resulting in the growth of only about 8% net. Some have defined this difference between occasional and core diver not only as it relates to activity, but attitude as well. An occasional diver is one who wants to go diving versus a core diver who wants to be a diver. The former group is growing, the latter is not. Overall, today's diver is less committed to the sport than past participants. Indeed, when I became a diver more than half a century ago, it was considered to be an integral part of one's persona. In most cases today, that's no longer the case, which has significant marketing implications. Arguments have raged for decades in the diving industry about the so-called diver dropout phenomenon. Various issues have been blamed for this, including competition from new high-adrenaline sports, the non-competitive nature of diving, the wide availability and growing diversity of new water sports, and the contention that millennials do not have sufficient discretionary income. But would it not make more sense to retire the idea of the diver dropout, given that a growing number of divers are so casual about the sport and often take a hiatus only to return at a later time? Incidentally, here in Florida, we find that many occasional divers are what we now term 80-80 divers. The occasional diver phenomenon requires serious consideration because, as this slide shows, it has significant implications for both the retail and travel sectors of the dive industry. Stop the video and take a few moments to review each point. This claim is something I've heard from colleagues for many years, but according to a recent SFIA survey, it belies reality. As you see from the data, millennials represent the highest level of participation in water sports and even in outdoor activities overall. So isn't it time the industry stop blaming younger generations for our decline and start implementing changes that satisfy the needs and expectations of this increasingly important demographic? Based on nearly a half-century experience as a scuba instructor and dive industry veteran, I'm convinced that we have failed to grow fundamentally because of this. Too many divers leave training unprepared and lacking the confidence to dive independently with little or no appreciation, understanding, or connection to the environment they seek to explore. I think this boils down to two factors. First is the lack of confidence. The level of incompetence I witness on dive boats all the time tells me too many divers spend insufficient time in training to feel comfortable diving independently. While we don't have time in this presentation to address the issue in more depth, it's probably the most common topic of discussion among dive professionals. It's also the subject of an excellent podcast on skill mastery by industry veteran and director of the academic dive program at Nova Southeast University, Tech Clark. A link to that podcast is provided here. I encourage you to listen when you can and heed Tech Clark's advice. The second reason for our failure to grow, which I believe is even more significant than the previous, is what we fail to include and where we place the emphasis on diver training. Specifically, entry-level training is almost entirely focused on how one dives rather than why. In other words, the way we train divers gives them the skills to dive, yet provides little emphasis or insight about the environment that motivated them to dive in the first place. As a result, new divers are what I call unconnected from the experience of diving. In turn, having no deep understanding of what's really going on around them, they become bored and abandon diving once the novelty wears off of passively watching all the pretty and scary stuff. One recent survey conducted by In-Depth Magazine, the Business of Diving Institute, and Dan Europe helps explain the issue of being unconnected from the environment, and the results are pretty startling. As you see, just 23% of the diver respondents said they had been well or very well prepared to understand the environment in which they were to dive. Of course, another way of looking at this is 77% did not feel prepared. But this is hardly surprising when you consider the response to the same question from dive professionals. It was even worse. Just 11% of that group said their instructor training course had prepared them well or very well regarding the environment. So, the reason why divers are unconnected is abundantly clear. By and large, those who teach them know little about the environment themselves. In my view, this is a major flaw in the dive industry's professional development system, and as you'll learn later, overcoming this flaw is one of the primary reasons that I was motivated to create Ocean Education International and the programming we offer. Consistent with the previous survey, these findings from a study by the Reef World Foundation confirm that the lack of environmental awareness in education is clearly evident among professionals in the field. And, unsurprisingly, the study also confirmed my previous point about poor diver skill and training. By the way, these subjects are explored in much more depth in another OEI professional development presentation called Merging Business and the Environment. The diving industry has traditionally viewed itself primarily as a retail endeavor driven by, as one of my colleagues once said, selling snorkels and teaching people how to blow bubbles. While that may have been valid in the past, it certainly is no longer the case, as we will see shortly. To grow, the dive industry must recognize that revenue from equipment sales may support it, but the essence of the industry is the actual experience of exploring the underwater world. And until this mindset changes from sales to experience, the industry will continue to languish. Another factor weighing the industry down is our continued insistence that growth depends on stealing a bigger portion of market share, or piece of the pie as it's sometimes described. But in reality, the answer lies not in fighting over crumbs, but in growing the pie. This paradigm shift from stealing a bigger slice to growing the pie is discussed more fully in the article seen linked here. This blue ocean strategy, by the way, has nothing to do with the actual ocean. Rather, it describes a strategy according to its originators, W. Chang Kim and Renee Malborn, as competing in uncrowded industries is no way to sustain high performance. The real opportunity is to create blue oceans of uncontested market space. Rather than the zombie model of the past, the dive industry must embrace a new model stressing the experience of diving. Here, both training and equipment sales are supportive, but not the industry's core reason for existence. In fact, this model seems obvious simply by looking at the revenue generated from dive travel, which is really just another way of describing experience. A recent Facebook post from an Ohio-based dive center exemplifies the point. As it says, I changed our philosophy from a teach and sell store to a create memories store. This is an example of exactly what an experience model proposes. The concept of selling experience over hardware is hardly new and is the basis of marketing campaigns by some of America's most well-known companies, such as Harley-Davidson. Note here, a motorcycle company has created ads that mention absolutely nothing about the product they sell. Yet, in the context of this discussion, the reason is simple. They recognize that what they are selling isn't hardware, but a lifestyle based on the experience of riding a motorcycle. Much of what we'll discuss next and in other OEI programs emphasizes concepts championed by marketing and leadership expert Simon Sinek. I encourage everyone interested in a successful career to read his groundbreaking book, Start With Why, at your leisure. However, I'll now ask that before you proceed, stop the video and follow the link to Sinek's TED Talk, which has been viewed by nearly 65 million people. In fact, at one time, it was the third most viewed TED Talk ever. Let's apply what you've learned from Sinek's TED Talk to the dive industry. What if we ask most dive professionals the question, what business are you in? You'd likely get an answer like this. I sell scuba gear or take people diving. How I do this is first by teaching customers to dive. And why I do this is to make money. This, as Sinek maintains, is a classic example of outside-in thinking, which is so common in every industry, not just diving. It entirely misses the point that making money is not why you're in business, it's merely the result. And this way of thinking reflects the zombie model mentioned previously that has thwarted our industry for decades. Of course, because all businesses are unique, it's impossible in this video to help you create a why for your business. But what if we applied Sinek's inward-out thinking, not just to individual businesses, but to the entire industry? To start, what might be the why for the recreational scuba industry? I've given this a lot of thought, and here's what I've come up with. The recreational diving industry exists to provide unique, enriching, and inspired underwater experiences that contribute to healthier lifestyles and promote a better understanding and advocacy for Earth's aquatic resources. Next, the how is by providing quality training to ensure maximum safety and enjoyment. And the what we do is sell equipment and technology and/or travel services required to safely enjoy the diving experience. Bringing this back to relevance for individual businesses and professionals, just why is your why so essential? Your why helps you maintain consistency, as well as keeping you grounded, energized, and focused. Your why clarifies your vision and helps you stay on track. And your why enables you to hire or train the right people to work with, because more than any certification or experience, they must share your why. In essence, your why is your core belief in what you do. Here are the landing pages for two very successful dive centers. Importantly, this is the first opportunity a business has to make an impression on many customers, and it will continue to brand your business every time someone logs on to your website. But what's their why? On the left, I'm not sure, but on the right, they clearly explain what this business is all about. So if your why is the core of your business, then why not shout it out immediately? Establishing a business's why is very personal to me because when I was introduced to the concept by Laurie Wilson of the Blue Ocean Network, I understood immediately its critical importance. So when I retired from my career as a college professor and formed my company, I thought long and hard about Ocean Education International's why. Although it took a while to evolve, it turned out to be very simple: to make marine tourism an important and positive force in ocean conservation. This is why, after 56 years as a scuba diver, 42 years in the scuba industry, and 20 years as a college professor specializing in marine science and conservation, I get up every morning. In my opinion, every dive professional who is serious about his or her career should follow the Business of Diving Institute. Their founder, Darcy Kieran, is one of the clearest thinkers in our industry, and his insights are invaluable. Additionally, I think every scuba instructor or anyone thinking about becoming one should have a copy of his book. Links to both are provided here. There is a new model for dive professionals that was not possible before the social media phenomenon, and it's what I call the non-brick-and-mortar professional. The idea is extremely well articulated in a video produced by my friend and colleague James Blackman, founder of both Miami Technical Diving and the website Divers Ready. Much of what we'll discuss next is derived from his video, What New Instructors Should Know. So stop here and view this 20-minute presentation before continuing. The most important take-home message from the Divers Ready video was James' admonition to build your own brand. In doing so, I would add that you also promote your own brand, not your training agencies. This is not meant to disparage the diver training agencies, who are largely responsible for scuba diving's excellent safety record. But in terms of business, trying to promote both your brand and that of a training agency dilutes yours. This is why, for example, in a commercial for a Ford F-150 truck, you don't see it in a McDonald's parking lot with the golden arches blazing in the background. Some may disagree with my recommendation not to promote their training agency, assured there's a good reason to do so because, of course, theirs is best. But every dive professional knows there are excellent instructors in every agency, and there are instructors in every agency who can hardly manage to tie their shoes. Quality is not tied to any one organization. Realistically, what distinguishes a competent and memorable training experience from a nightmare is the instructor, nothing else. In a reactive model, training agencies attempt to weed out their incompetent and unprofessional members through surveys and direct observation of standards violations. Most agencies do this through programs termed quality assurance, although at least one has changed this terminology to quality management. The management term is much more accurate because it is difficult, if not impossible, to manage quality reactively. In essence, what the training agencies do is attempt to enforce standards compliance. To illustrate the difference between the reactive approach of standards compliance versus the proactive approach of true quality assurance, let's return to an entity I mentioned before, McDonald's. The stringent quality regimen that McDonald's demands of its franchise holders goes well beyond the standards for food preparation. The franchise agreement dictates the quality of the entire customer experience, from what happens in the kitchen, what's on the menu, how the employees dress and behave, and even the decor. These are important quality measures in any business involving the public, including your own. But it's your job to create and enforce them, not that of any training organization. So build your own brand and promote it, and it only. Don't distract from it or dilute it with another. Here are some examples of non-brick and mortar dive professionals building their own brand. The companies off the dock in the scuba instructor you saw highlighted in the Divers Ready video. And when you get a chance, I encourage you to check out their websites, as well as that of Blue Horizons Diving. Note that none of these landing pages features any training agency affiliation. Here's another non-brick and mortar dive professional highlighting the idea of adventure, which we'll discuss more in a few minutes. They have built their brand without diluting it. In fact, although I've followed them for years, I only recently learned their training agency affiliation. You can follow the non-brick and mortar company Diving with Jess on Facebook and Instagram. And learn more about Jason Water of Underwaters at the link provided. As this recent survey indicates, a non-brick and mortar business may be a better financial move than aligning with a dive center. But even if you do work with a dive center, bringing your own brand rather than you as an individual is a big distinction, making you far more of an asset than just another instructor. Whether you work in a dive center, a resort, or operate a non-brick and mortar business, you shouldn't just be a dive professional. Become an adventure travel professional specializing in diving. This broader scope means that you are targeting not just divers, but all ocean enthusiasts through adventure tourism opportunities, as shown here. This is how we grow the pie. Adventure tourism is not just a buzzword or a description. It's a very large sector of what's been described as experiential tourism. Here you see there's even a professional association devoted to adventure travel and a formal definition that clearly encompasses scuba diving. I hope you will stay with me and learn more about how to capitalize on promoting not just dive tourism, but adventure tourism in a follow-up presentation in our professional development series called Merging Business and the Environment. This presentation was not designed to blame, throw stones, or belittle. The purpose of any deconstruction exercise is not to destroy, but to examine flaws in a system or idea and rebuild anew. Some of you may agree with what I've said, and some of you may disagree. But I hope at least it inspired you to rethink some of what you've assumed or were told about the scuba industry. I will leave you with a quote, but not by some famous marketing guru or overblown CEO, but the words of a little-known 18th century German physicist, George Lichtenberg. Lichtenberg lived during Europe's Age of Enlightenment. Like the coming artificial intelligence revolution of today, living through the scientific advancements of his time, Lichtenberg foresaw dramatic changes to society. While he could not foretell the future, he knew the world would change in a very big way. I cannot say whether things will get better if we change. What I can say is they must change if they are to get better. Finally, I'm providing my contact information here to genuinely solicit your feedback on this presentation or any program offered by Ocean Education International, especially in ways it can become more internationally relevant. So please do not hesitate to send me your thoughts and recommendations. And on that note, I wish you a long and prosperous career.